Thank you very much, Mr. Yakame. Very well spoken. I think that we feel the same way about the Japanese in Thailand. Now, you began by giving us some optimism. You know, it's almost like Thailand doesn't know how to fail. The Thai economy is very resilient, and Thailand works. But then you went into some of the challenges and the risks, which shows that we also have limitations. There's only so much that we can take, but so far we still can manage it. Now, let's have an Australian view, which is also reflective of the other chambers that you work with, the British, the Canadian, the US. Yeah, please, Mr. Leigh, Scott-Kemmis.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Thitinan. I think we just heard a wonderful story of a great success story. I mean, with the Japanese investment into Thailand, the significance of that, and the fact that most of that's sort of BOI supported. So consequently, the success of the whole BOI strategies in building a manufacturing industry in Thailand over the last sort of 20 years is an extraordinary achievement, and they're all to be sort of congratulated. The question that comes up in my mind with all of that, notwithstanding that success, as Dr. Narongchai said, it hasn't resulted in continual productivity growth in the Thai economy overall, and that's one of the issues I'd like to sort of focus on a bit and think about. Maybe I'm the one who's supposed to make the noise, am I? Sort of, given that you had others, but the Australian relationship, economic relationship, trading relationship with Thailand is just the opposite, quite frankly, of what we heard from our Japanese friends. We've been involved here for many, many years, but in recent years, Thai trade with Australia exceeds Australian trade with Thailand. And in the last 2 or 3 years, Thai investment into Australia exceeds Australian investment into Thailand. Now, I'm not sure that's the case with many other major economies in terms of their partnership, but it's a very interesting sort of phenomena at work here. So I think it's worth sort of thinking about what does all that mean in the way the Thai economy is developing and the way the Thai corporate sector is developing. And I think that's a story that we need to focus on. One of the things from Australia's point of view that has always sort of fascinated us is, I think last year 920,000 Australians visited Thailand. I mean, that's just unbelievable. That's 1 in 25. Now, I don't think you'd even get 1 in 25 Australians moving between Sydney and Melbourne. But yet, for some reason, Thailand's done an extraordinary job in selling its beaches, its temples, and what else it sells. But for some reason, we haven't been able to translate that into investment activity on a scale we think it should be for Australian investors into Thailand. Now, I think a lot of that's to do with the fact that the whole focus for the BOI and a lot of the Thai development in the last 20 years has predominantly been in manufacturing, and that's the story we heard, and it's been immensely successful. I think Australia's contributions are not so much in the manufacturing sectors. You know, they're more in mining, services, education, hopefully in the digital age, things of that nature, which we find to be a real struggle here. That it doesn't quite work the same way it has in the manufacturing sector. So I think there's maybe some models, some lessons there to think about. From a foreign investor's point of view, and this is sort of talking also in the context of there's a lot of joint work we have done on this with the American Chamber, the British Chamber, the Canadians and the South Africans. There's really 3 main things we focus on. One is the enforcement of the rule of law. And I'll come back to that. It's with its constituency of enforcement and the ability to actually focus on sort of legal reforms where necessary, which was questioned earlier. Secondly, sort of minimal sort of transaction interference. So people can transact efficiently and cheaply. Thirdly is the quality of inputs into doing business, predominantly skilled labour and infrastructure. The whole thing on the enforcement of law, I think all the people that have lived here over the last 5 to 10 years have to have noticed how the enforcement of law at street level and general level has just been sort of going down, down and down and sort of deteriorating. Round where I live, Supavud 11, that area, it's just unbelievable what goes on in front of your eyes every day, and you could just see it getting progressively worse and worse. Now that just is simply a reflection of what's happening through the whole system. So you've got to ask why that's the case. Now, we think and we believe, all of our chambers, that at street level people have got to see the rule of law being enforced. They've got to see the rule of law being respected, and they've got to see that they're serious and it's not just a one-off temporary situation. Because otherwise that won't flow through to everything else and the whole thing becomes anarchy. And I think we were close to that in the last year or so. It was pretty much getting anarchy. So we continue to want to talk about how to get back to effective rule of law. Now, we know in Thailand, we've all grown up here learning to do the workarounds, learning to know that there's some flexibility, there's some need to be able to work around regulations and so forth to just get on with life and be effective. Why is that? Because it's extremely difficult, as everybody knows here, to change things, to change regulation, to change laws. It just gets stuck in the sort of bureaucracy. The bureaucracy is extremely sort of fragmented, so it's very difficult to go to one area, one place, to have a change or someone to champion a change. Hence we see things that are obvious that just haven't been changed for 20 years. And our friends talked about in banking this sort of security law. I mean, it's sort of 50 years behind the times, where it's a major impediment for a lot of companies being able to sort of efficiently access the financial markets to the great benefit of the growth of these new areas. Hence problems with productivity. Why hasn't that been fixed? So consequently, this culture develops, I think, of workarounds. So in terms of the enforcement of the rule of law, I think that's an area that we focus on continually and requires a lot of discussion and focus. But on the first level, like now, is actually getting back to the rule of law at street level is something very welcomed. And I know the military are focused on that very heavily. And I know they need to follow up on that continually, so the average person actually sees it serious, and that's the way it's going to be going forward. Secondly, mineral transaction interference. And here in particularly, we know again the bureaucracy, a lot of the laws are reasonably wide, leave a lot of room in the bureaucracy to develop the regulations necessary to do things. And of course that leads to transaction interference. I mean, customs is a perfect example. The fact that they're prosecutor, judge and jury all for the same thing makes it extremely challenging when trying to work through those systems. So I think we'd all like to see some sort of independent tribunals develop where you can appeal sort of bureaucracy decisions, whether that be customs, whether that be revenue, wherever, that you're not appealing to the same people that actually imposed the penalty in the first place. So I think that's one area we'd like to see significant changes. Now, what's been interesting to observe is since the introduction of military rule, a number of the Thai organisations have been very effective in coming forward with specific recommendations. The Thai Chamber of Commerce, the Thai Board of Trade, the Bankers Association, Thai Federation of Industries and so forth. Now we know with the Thai Board of Trade and the Thai CC, they've been working extensively with the Thai bureaucracy on a whole bunch of reforms and so forth, and not getting particularly far. Now, if they can't do it, then we as sort of foreigners have got very little chance. So not with the military, with a single decision point, they're being able to actually get a number of these initiatives implemented, executed, and there's more coming. So we'll be going forward with a few of our own as well. So predominantly around that whole rule of law, the whole way the bureaucracy works with regulation, I think is an area that needs a lot of focus. And it hasn't got in the way of a lot of the manufacturing, but it's certainly getting in the way of the non-manufacturing sector. And as Dr. Narongchai says, that's where you're looking for growth, for your productivity growth, and that's where the impediments really do sit, in our view. The skilled labour area we've talked about for many, many years, and the fact that we've for some reason never really been able to develop a very effective vocational type of training, vocational qualification, vocational support process here, like you see in a lot of other countries, we're now paying the price for that, I think, as we need to upskill in a lot of our activities, as we need to upskill into the new industries and getting the productivity growth. So that's urgent. Now, that's one area I know Australia's sort of frustrated in, because that's an area Australia excels in, as does Germany and other places, which is the vocational area, but we can't participate in that here. The current regulations and laws don't allow our universities and TAFE colleges to open campuses here in the way that can contribute to that. So that's an area I think that we'd like to see reform. Some of the other areas that we've put forward are predominantly around work permits and things of that nature. The fact is that if you've got people visiting your company from your head office or whatever, they in theory need a work permit just to come and have a discussion with you. Now that just doesn't work. So consequently, most people are coming in on 30-day business visas to do business things, which is in fact in breach of the law. I mean, why don't we just fix that? Why don't we just introduce a 30-day business visa that allows you to do things of that nature without effectively being in breach of the law? And as we know, with a lot of things here, it's not a problem until somebody wants to make it a problem. Then it is a problem. So it's things of that nature that are really annoying and really do, I think, slow down investment in the non-manufacturing sectors. So all in all, I think, as we've always said, from Auscham's point of view and others' point of view, we've always been extraordinarily impressed with the fact that Thailand is a free enterprise economy. It's one of the freest enterprise economies in the world, actually, that everybody's sort of pro-business. We don't have Greens, we don't have unions, we don't have all those things we have in Australia that get in the way of effective sort of business growth. But yet, for some reason, it doesn't translate into the productivity growth and the sorts of outcomes that we were talking about earlier. My view is that's because of the inability to have flexibility in the law with this, to get legal changes, to be able to work in these areas that aren't straight commodity type or manufacturing type areas. And our recommendation is that's the area that I think this current government, our current leadership, can actually make enormous contribution in by actually just changing a whole bunch of this stuff without it all getting stuck in the bureaucracy. So from our point of view, given that we want to really contribute a lot more in the non-manufacturing areas, they're our recommendations, and that's very much the areas we'd like to see sort of taken forward. Thank you.
Thank you, that's very helpful. So non-manufacturing, and also you pointed to the barriers to doing business here, many of the barriers. Overall, I think that you reflect your views, Mr. Scott-Kemmis, the views of many chambers here, that in fact we had protests, there was paralysis, nothing was getting done, and since the coup, things are getting done. And this is the conundrum for the Thai story. Now, Dr. Supavud is our last discussant. He's the managing director, head of research at Phatra Securities, but he is in frequent contact with investors from the region. He is also an independent economist focusing on Thailand. If you look at his work, it's not about selling stocks, it's about analyzing the Thai economy and politics for the way that it is, not the way that he would like it to be or that we would like it to be. So please, Dr. Supavud, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and I am very honored to be here, and I thank Dr. Thitinan for inviting me this morning. Since Dr. Narongchai made some confessions, I have to make confessions to two questions. Number one, I committed an even bigger sin than he did because I predicted wrong. I thought there'd be no coup. Secondly, I must say that under the current atmosphere, there is indeed a need for self-censorship, some restraint in the way I say certain things in a public forum. And that is something that is, as you know, the result of announcements of the NCPO and actually also our compliance people in Bank of America Merrill Lynch and in Phatra, Thailand. Having said that, let me try to push the edge and try to present the other point of view in talking to investors, in making my own observations. First of all, the coup has been very welcomed, and it has been, I think, greeted with a lot of optimism, basically on 4 grounds. Number one, obviously we have averted political paralysis and unrest. Number two, there's obviously an expectation being fulfilled that budget spending will be on time and that there will be public investment-driven growth. The second part I'm a little bit more skeptical of. Number three, obviously there is improvement in public confidence, and that is supposed to translate it into 2 positive benefits. Number one, pent-up consumption. Now, the previous speaker, I think, mentioned very rightly that because household debt is very high proportion of GDP, that pent-up demand, I think, will not be very much going forward. The second is, of course, investor confidence and therefore crowding in by private investors. Finally, of course, it seems that everyone, for example, including the Bank of Thailand, reckons that GDP growth will be very strong in 2015. The Bank of Thailand forecasts 5.5%. So we are anticipating a V-shaped recovery. And it seems a sense that 2015 will be a very easy, strong year for Thailand to recover on. I'd like to address some of those points. I agree. Number one, you have averted political unrest and paralysis. Remains to be seen how the process of reconciliation will go forward. That was something that some foreign investors had asked me about. Will we in fact have genuine political reconciliation and political stability? For example, they were asking me things like, what would the new constitution look like? Would elections happen on time? Who would win the election? And after that, what would the role of the military be? And would that mean more stability or a little bit less stability? Those are questions, obviously, that no one can answer. My thoughts are that those questions, at least more people will ask them, and more people will wonder and try to make a view on them sometime this month of next year. Sometime this month of next year, I'm pretty sure we'll be trying to sit in a seminar like this and trying to answer those questions. But as you know, the stock market fund managers have to try to think ahead. And those were some of the questions that were put to me. On another interesting point is public investment-driven growth. There's a belief, for example, that because we have been talking about these projects, transportation projects, you read the newspapers, they all add up to something like 600 billion baht or so. And it seems, according to news flow, as if these are going to be approved within a few weeks. So far, when the market is disappointed, for example, yesterday, when they thought that the major meeting to endorse the strategy for transportation investment was postponed. That was partly caused the market to correct yesterday. Another reason might be because of postponement of the 4G, which I'll come to later on in the sense of as to what the market is really looking for in terms of politics and policy going forward. But coming back to public investment growth, I must say that if you look at data in the past 15 years, since we've recovered from the 1997 economic crisis, there have been no evidence of public investment having ever led economic growth. The reason is simple. Public investment, both government and state enterprises, add up to less than 6% of GDP during those years. Number two, they had been very volatile and there had been no correlation between them and the other key variables, be it GDP, manufacturing production index, or even private investment. And number three, public investment, again, government and state enterprises, had grown an average of less than half a percent a year during those 15 years. So in that way, it cannot be an engine of growth. Looking back further, it seems to me that there were cases, but you have to go quite a way back. In the 1970s, when we were hit with the oil embargo, there was an attempt to get state enterprises to invest and to try to cushion the impact of the oil embargo. But that did not end very well in the sense that we were, as a result, overspent and therefore unable to really contain inflation and imbalances following that spending spree. The successful case over the course of the 1980s, early 80s, when we basically, under General Prem, the Prem government, made a very successful investment in the eastern seaboard. And one economist remarked to me that we are still enjoying the fruits of that inheritance now. The problem is, of course, that inheritance is starting to exhaust itself. And that's something I think we have to really think hard about. Coming to some specific points on the ground that I can see at the moment. The market had heard about the economic roadmap. We haven't seen it yet. We hope to see it. Now, what have we seen so far? Number one, what we've seen are optimistic forecasts about GDP growth, as I mentioned to you before. I think this is a good thing. It does increase confidence. But that must be followed, I think, by more solid action and much more precise game plans. Number two, based on what we've seen so far, it seems to me, and again, I try to express my opinions with the best of intentions, the NCPO has distinguished itself, has tried to distinguish itself from elected politicians who are corrupt and waste taxpayers' money through their populist policies, and therefore are doing the opposite. Number one, zero tolerance for corruption and wrongdoing. And so you go as far as to deal with the motorcycle taxis and the other irregularities on the ground, including overselling of lottery prices. But of course also scrutinizing closely all the procurement projects that are worth 100 million baht or more. The concern here is, of course, there's certainly a trade-off between speed of implementation and scrutiny to ensure zero corruption. My colleague in Merrill Lynch had, for example, estimated that the drive to try to eliminate corruption and wrongdoing in China could cause its GDP to go down by 1% because of delays. It's a trade-off. Number two is, of course, a fairly conservative fiscal 15 budget. It is on time. We will not have delays in government spending, but it is a conservative one in three main respects. Number one, the 2015 budget is only 2% more than that of 2014, which means that it is smaller in real terms because inflation is running 2.5%. Number two, the budget deficit is smaller as a percent of GDP. In 2014, it's expected to be 2.1%. For next year, it's going to be 1.9% of GDP. Again, this is a signal that, in fact, you have slight contractionary fiscal policy. And of course, number three, the investment budget, as I understand it, is only a small increase in monetary terms and probably a fall in real terms. That's fine. That's what bond investors who talk to me like a lot. Coincidentally, I think that's why you have seen the things that you're seeing at the moment in the stock market. In fact, foreign owners of Thai stock had been selling. They had been selling in May by 36 billion baht or so, net sell. In June, another 357 million, and only bought slightly 16.5 billion during the first 18 days of July. But it was the foreign bond people who had been buying a lot of bonds. Their selling of bonds bottomed out in May and starting to accumulate more position, and they've been buying up something like 49 billion more, reflected in bond holdings. Now, if you look at foreign net buy of bonds, it will be much bigger because the bonds expire. Stocks don't expire. But you actually see a lot of bond buying in the last couple of weeks. And that was probably the reason why the Thai baht strengthened. And you do see that happening going forward. Now, does that reflect their confidence? Partly, yes. They call it a bear flattening yield curve. And it's a reflection of free money given by the Federal Reserve and a relatively conservative fiscal stance of the government of Thailand. Coming to the main point, what has the NCPO actually done in the past 2 months? Expectations have been high. But on the ground, it seems to me that things have been done a little bit more fragmented rather than totally orchestrated into a particular direction. I listed 7 of them very quickly, and I can go through that later. But it seems that there is still not an economic roadmap, which, in my mind, is simply how does Thailand make a living in the next 10 years? I think we have not really answered that question. How do we make a living? We had been making a living by exploiting the Eastern Seaboard as a basis for manufacturing. And that has been a very successful strategy. If you look at Thailand's GDP growth during the past 30 or so years since Macroeconomic came into existence, Thailand's growth had been led by growth in manufacturing, which grew almost 9% a year, whereas GDP was growing something like 6%. So obviously the leading sector had been manufacturing, and lately, of course, manufacturing for export, with the complements of multinational corporations like those from Japan. But are we going to continue on that path going forward? Can we continue on that path going forward? It's a question I think that needs to be answered. Finally, I have to touch on the Constitution, simply because I think it's something that is important and relevant for investors. And on this count, obviously, I'm not an expert, but these are probably the things that investors will try to ask about. Number one, me and my colleagues have quickly tried to add up the days it would need to get a constitution approved and it actually adds up to a maximum of 325 days. 325 days. Assuming that the National Reform Council is established in December, which it seems to me is a reasonable timetable, you won't have elections until next December. Now, again, this is maximum time frame as written in the Constitution as we interpreted it. That's something that investors probably have to, understand going forward, if in fact the maximum days are used. Number two, Article 44 gives wide-ranging power to the NCPO chief. And again, this power can change events, can change the course of events that increases perception of uncertainty and risk. Example, the NCPO decided to postpone the 4G auction by 1 year. That's NCPO power. And of course, it had affected the price of telecom stocks. In the case of the 4G auction, the postponement was actually conditional on the NBTC finding a solution for for TOT and CAT to ensure that they are profitable. That's not easy to do. Maybe they'll have the help of the super board, but it certainly, as I say, adds to uncertainty. Article 35 is interesting. It basically provides a guideline on writing up the new constitution. And from a private sector point of view, subsection 3, which says that there must be an effective mechanism to prevent, examine, and eliminate graft and wrongdoing in both the government and the private sector. That's a very encompassing constitution, seems to me. And it remains to be seen what the constitution will say about private sector and how do we, not go wrong. Finally, in general, the National Reform Committee, unlike the Constitution Drafting Committee in 2006, has a much bigger, wider agenda. And it seems to me that they might have a lot more work to do than you previously thought. So in other words, this process, the phase 2, might actually take longer. In fact, there is another article, interesting article, I think it's, I can't remember the article, it's 38, that basically gives you a Groundhog Day scenario. If you watch the movie Groundhog Day, it's basically that if you do all this thing and the National Reform Council reject the Constitution, you start again. And it seems that there is no, you can do this many times, like in Groundhog Day. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Supavud. I think we will touch on the issues and questions you raised shortly. We've heard Japanese views from Thailand. I want to invite Mr. Koyanagi to maybe provide us with a little bit of a Japanese view from the regional perspective, a brief comment.
As introduced, my name is Ken Koyanagi, publisher of Nikkei Asian Review, which was launched last November in an intention to cover pan-Asian economic and political business issues from Asian perspective, not Western perspective. We decided to start doing this because we have had, as a Japanese, we have had an impression that Western media tend to preach about democracy. As you may know, Japanese politics has been one-party ruled democracy for a long time after the war. So a lot of political scientists in America and UK call Japan, question whether or not Japan is really a democracy for a long time. But in exchange for that political stability, we had economic growth. We have been successful in developing Japanese economy because of that political stability under a very unique democracy. And I think if you look at all the Southeastern Asian nations, we having very hard time establishing democratic systems. At the same time, having economic growth on hand, I think it's very difficult for usual peoples or usual countries with plural ethnic groups or plural religious groups or plural economic classes to establish a very stable democracy which enables change of governments smoothly. So I think what's happening in Thailand, and probably what's happening even in Indonesia, because the opponent actually denied the whole election process itself and left battleground, basically. So I think it is time for probably for those scholars like you guys, political scientists, and probably Dr. Narongchai, who has been a prominent political scientist as well, to think about what is a better system of governance or better system of decision making to enable people's voice be heard by decision makers and enable good policies. At the same time, protecting basic human rights or freedom of speech. I think it's a kind of point of view we want to expose to the rest of the world. Thank you very much.
I want to begin with a question that Jan Narongchai doesn't have to answer, but I want to deposit it with you. You know, when we had the coup in February 1991, it was a popular coup. It was seen initially as a good coup because the corruption was so uncontrollable and manageable. We had what was known at the time as a buffet cabinet, right? Since then, when buffet cabinet means that you pick and choose the various projects and commissions and kickbacks. Since then, the corruption has become sophisticated. Now, what I would call we have now kind of set menus. Set menus meaning that corruption is taken through certain portfolios, certain ministries, certain projects, and they continue kind of like a set menu. You get this and this and this and this. But the coup was very popular, both in 91 and 2006. In 2006 coup and this coup, similar. We had a protest in the streets, and then it went on for some time, instability, unrest, and the coup comes in, the coup was staged, and people were relieved. So there's a low base effect. I mean, there's a low base effect for the GDP for next year. It will grow higher than this year because this year is so poor. It will be low growth this year. And there's also a political low base effect that when you have paralysis from street protests for 6 months and more, you have a government that comes in with absolute power. It can decide anything that it wants to do, and it looks really good. But it's been only 2 months. So I want to pose a question to Jan. How do we avoid the conflation of military governing, military participating, and military watching? And this is something that I think, sometimes we have the law of unintended consequences. When the coup took place on February 23rd, 1991, I think that they had a genuine intention of getting rid of the corrupt government. And there are some other issues that they want to deal with. In 2006, I think they had an intention of getting rid of the corruption at the time. And again, in 2014, we have the seemingly genuine intention to get rid of corruption. But the initial period can turn in different directions. So going forward, and especially in view of the interim constitution, I think that there will be some concerns about how do we avoid, essentially NCPO is playing God. Playing God is tricky. I mean, how do you play God with enlightenment? They're enlightened, right? And benevolent. I think that they've been benevolent. There has not been there have been violations of certain rights and so on, but there's been no physical harm in the kind of Thai style velvet, silky, cool. But beyond that, we have to also think about how things will unfold after the coming weeks and months. They also have to be even-handed. I mean, Dr. Supavud mentioned how what we've seen is kind of scattered. And a lot of it involves low-hanging fruits. You know, you can go deal with the motorcycle taxi mafia. There's a big black market in Thailand, a lot of rent-seeking, and you go into the vans, the lottery. I mean, it's all low-hanging fruits that they can address and tackle. The two problems, one is how do you do it evenly, right? So it's fair and comprehensive. And second, how do you do it in a way that it lasts after they leave, actually, that these problems are fixed. But there are higher hanging fruits that they are not tackling. And these, I think, will be the barometer for the ultimate success or whatever legacy the coup makers will leave behind. Do they tackle things like the duty-free monopoly at the airport, you know, the bigger players, the bigger fish, and there's a lot of them. So I want to just raise that, and somehow maybe you can address it in your remarks, how the military will try to be enlightened and benevolent and stay through these stages of governing, participating, and eventually watching. The floor now is open. We have a lot of diplomats, investors, media, academics, NGOs, and so on. So very good, distinguished and diverse audience. And you now have your chance to pose questions, comments.
Yeah, Jamie Woodward from UBS in Thailand. I'd like to address Dr. Narongchai and thank him also for his very open comments early on. You talk of governance and action by the NCPO, but a few things stand out. There's a saying that says the fish stinks from the head. Now, I'm not saying that the fish is stinking. However, the NCPO currently are unaccountable and they have not declared any of their assets whatsoever. And that gives us some surprise. Surely it would be a good start for the NCPO maybe to at least go down that route to get the trust amongst everyone.
First, about its timeline, just for clarification, the timeline is like this. Now we have the interim constitution, names of the members of the NLA, National Legislative Assembly, would be announced most likely within 2 weeks, and government will be formed after that. And as General Prayut said, the government with military participation would be in place definitely in September. As for the National Reform Council, the process will start also in August. There would be this election process. People are invited to apply through their associations or any entities. They cannot apply directly. They have to be nominated by a legal entity. Hopefully, hundreds and thousands would be applying, and the election commission would be the secretariat to process these applications. There would be a selection committee to be appointed definitely by the end of August. And these selection committees, there will be 11 of them, not counting provincial ones. These 11 selection committees, each would have 7 members, and each one would have to screen the names from these applications and coming up with 50 names in 11 areas. Now, as the General promised, this process of the National Reform Council would begin in October, not as late as you mentioned. That's why election is going to be like October next year. the intention of the National Reform Council is to be the place where people would argue, and hopefully they can argue until they lose their breath and maybe they drop dead. It's up to them. So all opposing parties would be encouraged to apply, to go for argument, like argumentative Indian. They using the Indian as a model of how to argue without fighting. The Indian can argue, and they don't fight, they just argue. Even before going to war, they argue first, and they're asking why we go to war. That's how the Indians are. So this we hope, the Reform Council will be like that. And based on their argument and conclusion, that would form the new constitution. What is of concern is, I think for both the speakers, is the shape of the new constitution is what it's going to look like. We have this dilemma here, if we believe that Thai society would have good governance, people would behave, then we do not have to legislate their behavior. That's another school of thought, that we must legislate their behavior. So constitution in that second school of thought would be so lengthy, would include so many things in it, that I don't like that at all. But the proposal, that people should have lists of items and issues that they would like to make sure that such thing would not happen again. For example, populism, extreme populism, how to avoid or how to prevent such extreme populism like this rice pledging scheme to ever take place again. Because that is a new kind of corruption, is a new kind of populism, capitalism, democracy, meaning instead of using your money to pay for your votes, you're using public money to pay in order to get your votes. And that is very damaging to the economy. So we don't know what will be the outcome, but that's the timeline. And according to my information, as General Prayut said, the election is likely to be in October next year. That I cannot answer because there is no law at the moment, that NCPO members must declare their assets. But I think after this constitution, maybe that would come in because they would have to be included in as members of the so-called government. The NLA members have to declare assets. National Reform Council members have to declare assets, and ministers and prime minister and so on. I think they would all be included.
Thailand can survive the previous 3 coups, as everyone said, because the eastern seaboard had been such an engine of growth. If that's no longer going to be the driving engine of growth, then what is going to drive growth for Thailand over the next 10 to 20 years? And does the NCPO recognize that is an important question? And 2, given all the other priorities, the things they want to achieve, is there any likelihood of that question being addressed in the next year or 2? Thirdly and finally, given the constitution they're likely going to put in place, which will have lots of checks and balances, and is probably likely to prevent a concentration of power ever again going forward, what's the possibility that we end up with a government who's able to actually ever engineer structural change in the long term under a much more, I guess, tighter, rigid constitution? Thank you.
Thank you. Ian, tell us where you from.
I'm from a fund management company called Senha Saicheua.
Okay, thank you.
No, I would not make reference to the advisory board. We have promised to keep confidence on anything that we say. But based on what the head of NCPO has been doing, and particularly his statement on Friday night, and particularly his song, you can read between the lines and what he meant. And I think that the best guide is that he seemed to follow the strategy outlined in the 11 plan that they use for decision making on the budget for next year, and that is likely to be used when the government makes statement in Parliament in September. And the new engine of growth will be regional development, the northeastern, northern, and in connection with neighboring countries, in connection with the GMA's development. If you look at the 11 plan, connectivity is a top priority. And if you look around the countries at the moment, you will see many cities are emerging, growing very fast. They are no longer northeast of Bangkok or north of Bangkok, they become central of the GMS. And that is a new, an important strategy. That's why you see this economic zone being set up. That's why you see committees on ASEAN being set up. This is a prelude to things that the government will be doing. The second one, and I have to explain why the 4G thing's been postponed and so on. The second one is that again in the 11 plan, we want to see the knowledge economy taking place in Thailand, knowledge-based economy taking place in Thailand. A crucial factor affecting the knowledge-based economy is the digitalization of the society. And when you looked at our digital management system, which is in place at the moment, is in a mess. So the decision to postpone this 4G thing is actually following the need to set in place a proper system for ICT, for digitalization. And it will come in a comprehensive manner. And if that is done, there will be a clear role for ICT ministry, for the NBTC, the commission, plus other state enterprises, what role they will play in the whole setup of the process of digitalization. I am very serious about this particular matter. I have been a development economist for many years, and if you look at Thailand, we missed industrialization. It came very late in the 1980, almost 100 years after Japan, 40 years after Korea, and so on. And I do not want Thailand to miss this digitalization. Korea has already gone ahead. And when we talk with the generals, we are very serious about the need for Thailand to must have digitalization. So those are the two driving forces. But then you have many other reform areas, again, as he mentioned in his speech on Friday. Energy sector needs reform. Energy pricing, you can expect new relative prices for energy. At the moment, you know how it is. The diesel price is about 30 baht, whereas benzene 45. And the idea is to have diesel price being low because it's used by poor people. I have two supercars, both are diesel based. I'm not poor, don't help me, I don't need it. And the consumption of diesel is just not possible, not sustainable. The quantity of diesel consumption and also LPG price is crazy, and the cost of importing LPG for domestic market is just not sustainable. So you can expect major reform in the energy sector. And I already mentioned in my speech about the labor sector, how to best treat workers. That has already started. Luckily, we could make this quick decision about taking care of the Cambodian workers by setting up one-stop service for them to come in, and then we later would process, their papers and so on. Another one that I mentioned in my talk is the fiscal reform. Yes, we would like to have more government investment, but when we look at the revenue sources of revenue that we have is just too limited. That's not possible, to have this revenue being about 17% of your GDP and trying to spend so much money. Otherwise, we go into debt. We are not a country like the US that can have debt ad infinitum. We have to behave better than that. Or not Japan.
In the past, there was a correlation between the military and the technocracy. When the generals were in charge, the technocrats were given the autonomy and latitude to run the economy. Do you feel that this time the generals are listening to your policy proposals and reform plans, and to what extent, and do they have their own agenda, or are they taking the agenda from you?
No, I would not. I wouldn't say that they have agenda from me, but they have that agenda from the national plan. And the national plan is the outcome of works of the technocrats, plus people where they went around and have a series of meetings and so on. I think they are using that, and they already said on TV that they are using the 11 plan as a guideline, and it has a lot of implication. And you're right, when the military are involved with government, they rely on technocrats and bureaucrats, which is natural for them. The military people, they get very nervous when they talk to businessmen. Different kind of animals, you see.
My first question is more on ideological, on the good governance. Ajahn Narongchai has clearly identified that the need for this coup has been more or less because we've had bad governance and we need good governance instead of good government, or one would lead to the other. And from the view of business community, it seems quite clear that the problem that we also need to reform is the bureaucratic reform and not just political reform. And Ajahn Narongchai has identified that one of the things that has been good out of this is that it led to one-point decision-making that make things fast forward, move things forward easier. And I wonder that is that the one-point decision-making is a way of strengthening the institution that we actually need to enhance the institutional infrastructure of Thailand. And that same point, I would also like to ask the two panelists who represent the business community. You have mentioned that so far things have moved forward faster. And in your business community view, do you take that at any cost, that this comes from a one-point decision of the NCPO, and is that sufficient as a way to guarantee Thailand's infrastructural development? And the next question that follows up on that one is a short one. If I ask the two business community who has clearly reflected the need for a more layered economy for Thailand, what would be your one area of your concern in terms of progressing more toward a manufacturing-based industry, and for Australia in terms of a more tertiary and service-led sector? Thank you very much.
You notice that now it's stopped. One-point decision-making was used only for a few matters which were clocked up in the system before 22nd of May. But now you notice, and as Ajahn Supavud just mentioned, this transportation projects not decided yesterday because they would want to wait for the government to come in. The ICT, all this, what to do with all these agencies, also postponed until the government comes in. Energy prices, and remember NCPO said they will reduce energy prices. We say, oh, no, don't do that. Postpone until the government comes in. So many, including tax reform. So no, there would not be a one-point decision making because the matters are so complicated. And the soldiers themselves, they're shaking their heads. They're too difficult for them to understand. Oh, this question, Narongchai always say, no.
How is Thailand going to make its living in the next 10 years? What does it look like? Our societies throughout the world have moved through an agricultural phase to a manufacturing phase, into a service industry, and into an IT world where machines actually think these days. I understand that political conditions have required certain political declarations that the curricula will change in the schools and so forth. One thing that was missing from that particular list was issues related to critical thinking, problem-solving capabilities, the sort of skills that for Thailand to move on ahead and be competitive in a globalized world, in a globalized marketplace. That is what Thailand needs. And it's not really whether it's a tablet policy or whether it is a clever school system that you should be initiating. Take a longer term view. This is very much, it's not only a political change, but a cultural change. I think that is very much required in the educational area for Thailand to be economically viable in the future.
So my questions may be different from what we have discussing now. I'm more focusing on what Dr. Narongchai and all, some other panelists have said about the regional, not the regional integration, but it's kind of connectivity. And what I would like to seek for the views from the panelists is, well, from what we have discussing now, what our NCPO have been doing now, what is the effect on the regional level, not just only what happening in Thailand and what are we going to grow, but as next year we are coming into the AEC. So what we are doing at this moment may be affect to the regional point of view. So I just want to seek for that view from the panelists. Thank you.
And my strategy this year has been to long green, short democracy, and that's worked out wonderfully. With that in mind, my question is, what's the rush to go back to democracy if it's working out so well?
I think it's one of the things that concerns, I think, a lot of the business community is that the memories from 2006, because following the coup and then the appointed government that followed that, it was clearly anti-foreign business, and it did a lot of damage for some time. So there's a fear that that could happen again, and the transition going from where we are now to whatever it'll be in the future is pretty dangerous, and that's where those sorts of problems and issues can emerge again. Now, so far, we haven't seen any real signs of that, because I think people with the wisdom of Dr. Narongchai are there sort of telling them they've got to think about this slightly differently. But that's a real fear that exists out there, and it will hold back some investment until there's a clear path on all of that. But I think the message has come through loud and clear is, as we've all said, the manufacturing model that served us all so well is going to need a brother and a sister. And we know the BOI has sort of been trying to come up with a new incentive scheme that they're looking to implement early next year, and that's a lot of that's based on trying to deal with this productivity issue and this moving to a brother and sister of the manufacturing sector. But our fear is they're doing it within a manufacturing model mindset, and it's still this sort of cluster approach that's sort of geography based, not sort of supporting industry based. So I think there's some real challenges there and some real long ways to go. So the only way that gets dealt with is to basically free up the market and let the market get on with it. And that's where the impediments are, in my view, through the Foreign Investment Act, through the ability of the people to invest fully into services of all sort, and the ability to let the Thai SME sector really grow and prosper, and there's too many blockages for that.
Thank you. Dr. Supavud?
I just have a few comments. Just number one, I think this is a real issue. How do we make a living in the next 10 years? Thinking very simplistically, I thought that the issue should be something that we in Thailand work together to crystallize a sort of a strategy that we agree on. At the moment, the Board of Investment is doing some things, but I'm not sure if that has been, in fact, something that everyone realizes that that's where we're headed and whether they would agree with that. What the BOI is going to do, it seems to me, is of course to reduce some of the incentives that were given, particularly to manufacturing, and redistributing it and reducing it because we have cut the corporate income tax, and that will come at a considerable cost, fiscal cost to the government. As such, something needs to replace it. Now, simplistically, you have some issues that you have to ask yourself. Do you want to still have a development model where you basically invite foreign multinationals to put more production facilities in Thailand and therefore have some very small ability to steer that development course, because it will be up to the multinationals to determine for us what we should produce and sell to the world. It also implies that export to GDP will keep on rising, and therefore we will subjected to changes in global demand rather than domestic demand. That's sort of one path that we could think about. The other thing, as Dr. Narongchai mentioned too, is of course when you do industry, you do have to have the resources to back it, particularly cheap energy, and you have to be very good in managing the environment. Are we capable of, are we willing to do those things? We're running out of gas in 10 years. Do we go to the Cambodians and say, can we drill in that joint development area? Let's drill gas there. Or what do we do in terms of energy? Because if we wanted nuclear power, you can sort of see how we'll have many more seminars if we will have a nuclear power plant in Thailand, for example. Or do we do the other stuff? Medical tourism, medical tourism, and all the other support industries, good telecom sector, a good banking, safe environment for tourism, for healthcare, for even semi-retirement. Do we want to go that direction? I think those are important issues to think about. And I agree that critical thinking is important in all this. Unfortunately, I think there's a trade-off. If you think critically on economics, you might have to think critically on politics as well. And I think that's off the table for now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Yakame has yielded the floor to our main speaker, Ajahn Narongchai. So, Ajahn, this intervening NCPO period, we have many questions and many issues. I think we are wondering whether it will lead to a better future for growth, for democracy. There are a number of issues that have been raised. In particular, perhaps you can also address whether we are going to see the FBA kind of act that we saw in December 2006, the Foreign Business Act that was briefly implemented at that time or enforced at that time. And also at that time there was a couple of controls that were imposed very briefly. And other issues that have been raised. You can have the last word. Go ahead.
I think we can take the BOI as a good case study on how to predict the behavior of the NCPO. When they came in, I think this will be of interest to private investment, for foreign investment. There was the amount of application, investment amount of application awaiting 700 billion baht plus. 700 billion baht plus. So first they were talking about let's reform BOI. And we said, oh, no. Yes, we need to have reform BOI, but we must approve, we must consider this application first because they apply under the old criteria. And if we just, throw them away, that would not be right or proper. So they went on and reviewed the applications and started approving and so on. And now they are talking about new criteria. In fact, this new criteria, new BOI and so on, was discussed before, but never really seriously implemented. Number one, they have moved the BOI out of Ministry of Industry. Again, another one-point decision making. Something I think important to do, and they moved that out of the Ministry of Industry. If you study the history of BOI, when they went to the Ministry of Industry, it was very much interfered by politicians, by the ministers, either ministers who are working there or ministers who are working behind the scene. You know, Ministry of Interior, no, Industry. They have the system of shadow minister, real minister, and acting minister, and so on. There's so many of them. Making decision there, but actually the same person with many shadows. So that was moved out, and new criteria would be set up. It would be, we would welcome, they would welcome, advice and comment from business people. But we know very well that industry base is no longer viable for Thailand. So moving away from, of course, continue to promote industry, but adding on services. And Thai direct investment overseas. Thai direct investment overseas, as we mentioned, we already have a lot of investment in Australia. Same is true in other neighboring countries and ASEAN countries. In fact, this question from Fiscal Policy Office is about how business people think of this policy that would affect neighboring countries of Thailand, whether they would move away from Thailand and go to invest in this country instead, and so on. We wouldn't mind. We don't think we should be worried very much about that. So that is my comment about BOI. Now, apart from this, I only want to say that I've been working with them for 2 months, and they're quite good. They're quite good. They difficult to say. They have good intention, and the difference between this 2013 and 2006 was that at that time the strategy, the intention, the focus was on Thaksin, trying to do everything to make sure that Thaksin would never come back to power. So it was like Tom and Jerry movie, that we've been seeing for over so many years. One you call it rat, or Thaksin, you cannot call him rat, sorry. One mice, anyway, whatever. And they just try to chase after him, regardless of what destruction that would create. So in fact, that was a very bad move. And this one, this 2013, you notice that they just want to focus on doing something different and solving problems. And in fact, I don't think they ever mentioned Thaksin, in any of the meetings that I've had. And hoping that by delivering, by doing things good for the society, good for the economy, it would make this so-called democracy with accountability more feasible for Thailand. I say a word more feasible, I don't know, but as I said at the end of my speech, I hope I do not have to commit another sin of hoping for another coup d'etat. Again, that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't think anyone in this room wants to commit any more sins or another sin, and I hope this panel has not been sinful in organizing it. Look, thank you very much for coming and for joining us. I want to thank in particular Nikkei, Mr. Iguchi, Gwen Robinson, and our Japanese colleague, Mr. Ken Koyanagi. And I also thank Mr. Leigh, Scott-Kemmis, and certainly Dr. Supavud, Saicheua, and in particular Narongchai, Akrasanee, who has shared with us some of the experiences from inside that we could not otherwise ascertain. This is very telling, and I hope that they will listen to you more and more. Until next time, our next seminar is on Tuesday, on the 28th. The flyer is outside. Thank you very much for coming. Please join me in thanking the speakers and the organizers.
Support it.